Welcome to another installment of Deconstructing Babylon, where we discern the signs and symbols of the mystery religion of Hollywood Babylon. I'm the Discerning Clerk, and I use a biblical framework to deconstruct my favorite movies from the 90s.
Noticed your eyeglasses. They don't have any lenses in them.
They're my dad's. The lenses hurt my eyes.
I love using that clip from The Sixth Sense, but it may come across as a bit obscure or missing context. There's a reason I don't say I use a biblical lens, but rather a framework. I don't need corrective lenses as a rule, because lenses are used to correct our vision. And I don't necessarily want to correct my view of movies using the Bible. Instead, I use my knowledge of the Bible to frame everything I see, and that aids me in discerning lies and messages from an ancient belief system the Bible calls a mystery religion. It's first mentioned way back in Genesis at the Tower of Babel. It's had many names and iterations throughout human history, and it will be at its peak of popularity when Messiah returns as promised. I refer to it as the mystery religion because it wants to be secretive, Gnostic, and widespread. It demands worship and sacrifice. It gives followers an identity, but not a law. In fact, there aren't any rules to follow the mystery religion, and there is no barrier to entry. The way is broad, and many find it. And the biblical framework is the only way to view it, identify it, and see it clearly for the false belief system it really is. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I pray you have ears to hear the truth, as difficult as it may be. And as always, please don't take my word for it. Know the word for yourself. If I had a nickel for every Will Smith alien invasion movie made, I'd have 2 nickels. Well, 4 if we're counting sequels. It's not a lot, but strange that it's happened twice. Today's selection is one of those times, and I probably should have waited until July 4th to do it. Independence Day was released in 1996 and came at the beginning of a massively successful film transition for The Fresh Prince. Let me say, I've tried to do his other alien invasion film, Men in Black, but I'm never able to convert the physical media to digital format, so this is my next best choice. It boasts a star-studded ensemble cast and paints America as a brave and heroic nation. It garners 4.5 stars from the Video Movie Guide, which writes, "The best retro science fiction epic since George Lucas released Star Wars is also a distant cousin to the 1970s disaster flick. A slam-bang, thrill-a-minute effort that truly puts the motion in motion picture. Scripters Dan Devlin and Roland Emmerich, who also directed, went back to H.G. Wells and War of the Worlds for inspiration, and the result is a star-studded tale of extraterrestrial invasion, human dignity, and good old American know-how. Bill Pullman makes a grand United States president who watches the White House get blown out from beneath him. Jeff Goldblum is the somewhat absent-minded scientist who ultimately saves the day, but the Oscar-winning special effects carry this high-octane action fest. Rated PG-13. It's fascinating to me that Independence Day was compared to both Star Wars and War of the Worlds by these reviewers, and I'm interested to see what they're showing us about extraterrestrials here. So, let's see what we see in Independence Day. The movie starts on July 2nd, we are told, and the first image is the motionless American flag placed on the moon since 1969, they like to say. Go ahead and watch my deconstruction of Apollo 13 if you want my opinion of this Hollywood production. A voiceover reads a plaque left behind by the NASA actors, but then an ominous shadow covers the historic and eternal footprints. The dark shadow is cast by a large spacecraft that seems headed towards the globe Earth. We then cut to a satellite-seeking agency called the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute. Perhaps this is a fictional agency, or perhaps not. Lord knows folks have had their eyes on the skies for decades. This time, the machines have detected some activity. At least, they hear something.
It's coming from the moon.
Obviously, they have to report this to the government, and Space Command is confounded by what could be sending the signal, never mind what they may be saying. Then we meet a casual commander-in-chief, President Thomas Whitmore, and First Lady Marilyn, she wishes, separated by time and space for some reason. President Whitmore gets right to work when he learns his approval rating is falling. It must be an election year.
Isn't it amazing how quickly everyone can turn against you?
But he doesn't have time to dwell on his public approval because he soon learns that the ominous and mysterious object emitting an audible signal is approaching Earth. From DC to New York, and a brief shot of the Statue of Liberty, which is meant to remind those looking upon it of America's hard-fought independence. But then cut to Central Park and a black and white chessboard, which ought to remind you of the Freemasons who actually built the nation. And we meet Jewish father-son duo Julius and David Levinson.
Checkmate.
David is a scientist and a real environmental warrior, already commenting about the dangers of styrofoam, smoking, and not recycling.
My God in heaven.
I haven't seen this kind of eco-activism since Clueless, maybe, but we haven't really seen it to this level. They are telling us that the satellites out in orbit are crashing into this massive spacecraft that is roughly 1/4 the size of the moon. The moon is a light and has no substance of its own. It's just a luminary, not a rock. But I digress. Across the country, we go to California, where we meet crop duster Russell and his 3 children, Miguel, Alicia, and Troy. I said it was an ensemble cast. I just didn't quite realize how vast the ensemble was. This is a lot of characters. Russell flies his plane under the influence, and Miguel rides a dirt bike without a helmet. It's a dysfunctional family, to say the least. Back at the White House, POTUS and his people discuss what to do. The DoD wants to blast the UFO, and the DOJ is surprisingly hesitant.
We don't yet know enough about what we're dealing with to make any kind of intelligent judgments.
They soon learn the craft has broken off into smaller pieces that had positioned over major cities across the world, making this an international problem and not just an American problem. Cut to Iraq, which happens to be one of the few nations not in the UN that doesn't have a Rothschild central bank and is outside the jurisdiction of American military force. As such, they have long been considered an enemy of the so-called free world. They're one of the first to see this smaller craft that has entered the Earth's atmosphere.
The unexplained phenomenon is headed for Moscow.
Russia has also been considered an enemy of democracy, but the White House is still scrambling for how to respond to protect America. A massive fireball in the sky consumes military aircraft and all personnel on board, much to the dismay of those listening from the Oval Office. The immediate response is to move President Whitmore to a secure location, but a good captain goes down with the ship. The president advises a statement to the public to stay in their homes rather than flee the cities.
And what happens if they do become hostile?
And God help us.
Scientist David narrows down the signal emitting from the smaller crafts, and he believes they will only last 7 hours before they disappear entirely. On the other coast, crop duster Russell drowns his sorrows, and we learn it's a coping mechanism from a reported abduction years earlier.
Oh, yeah. Seems years back our boy here was kidnapped by aliens, did all kind of experiments on him and such. Tell him about it, Russ.
Large shadows creep over national monuments and historical landmarks until these crafts finally come to rest at their assigned post. Fight or flight kicks in with all those who watch on as the sun gets blocked out.
Address the nation. There's gonna be a lot of frightened people out there.
Yeah. I'm one of them.
Finally, after 30 minutes of movie, we meet Captain Steve Hiller and the presence of a large yellow breed dog. A dog is God to the director or associated characters, according to the occultic law of reversal, often used by Hollywood Babylon.
Just trying to impress you.
Back in New York, David figures out what the signal from the alien crafts is actually saying.
Using this one signal to synchronize their efforts in approximately 6 hours, the signal's going to disappear and the countdown's going to be over.
And then what?
Checkmate.
He calls his ex-wife Connie, who is herself the press secretary in the White House, and while the president addresses the nation, David tells Connie to leave. Captain Steve and any other high-ranking military are called off their 4th of July leave to, once again, defend the country against this off-Earth threat. Most people are choosing to leave the urban areas, especially where the spacecrafts are situated, sensing a doom that the officials are attempting to dissuade. David empirically knows that the threat is real, having understood the embedded signal. Russ experientially knows the threat is real, having been taken by them in the past.
We've got to stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
Russ's kids take off, leaving the California desert for a major U.S. city, which is weird, but they allude to the youngest, Troy, being chronically ill and needing access to medication. Steve gets to his base, and a rejection letter from NASA awaits him. It seems the military pilot wants to be an astronaut, and a picture that opened the film hangs in his locker, like an Interstellar pinup.
Oh, God, I hope they bring back Elvis!
That's fascinating. I've gone down my fair share of rabbit holes, but that's one I hadn't heard before, that Elvis Presley was abducted by aliens. David gets an audience with the president as aircraft goes up to try to communicate with the spaceship above DC. David explains the aliens are using Earth's own satellites to coordinate the attacks, which will occur in about half an hour. The communication effort fails, and the spacecraft fires on the unarmed helicopters, upping the threat level to all humanity. Now the countdown is down to 9 minutes and 11 seconds before the coordinated attack, which is a pointer to September 11th, 2001, and the attack on American soil.
Time's up.
When the clock runs out, the ships open fire, burning up the monuments to industry in their wake. Few escape the devastation, but some of our heroes and main characters survive the initial blast. Troops assemble and take to the skies for their counterattack.
Holy God.
The experienced pilots fire on the spacecraft over Los Angeles, and they quickly learn their weapons are powerless and cannot break through an invisible shield, which happens to glow a bright Disney villain green. However brief the color appears, Steve comments on it.
Oh no, you did not shoot that green shit at me!
It is my opinion that this particular shade of green that is so often used to associate a villain is the same shade of green the Apostle John saw in his vision of heaven, and Yahweh's throne room in particular. I'll be interested to see how often they use it here.
Put your mask back on! That's an order, Marine! I can't breathe!
Steve's friend and partner Jimmy dies, but Steve manages to outrun and outwit the alien craft. And now they have some evidence of the enemy attacking the whole world.
Welcome to Earth.
They make several references to a few characters being sick or needing medication for different reasons. It may be nothing, simply added for dramatic effect or sympathetic character building. But with the mask reference and the George Floyd quote, we heard it's giving COVID programming. Having such a large cast means not everyone is going to live to the end, and we've already lost a few. They allude to the First Lady not making it, and now the Vice President and the rest of the cabinet, who were meant to be in a secure location, have perished. The President and his advisors have survived this far by taking to the skies in Air Force One, where they continued to have discussions and make decisions about preserving what remains.
You're not going to launch nuclear weapons. You're going to kill them and us at the same time.
David and his father Julius also happen to be on board, thanks to David's quick thinking. The advisors claim they are just trying to do their best with a situation they are completely unprepared for.
Don't give me unprepared.
Come on, Julius.
It was what, in the 50s or whatever, you had that spaceship.
Funny that 30 years after this, we finally get full disclosure from American officials regarding Area 51 and what happens in Roswell, New Mexico.
There's no Area 51. There's no recovered spaceship.
Excuse me, Mr. President. That's not entirely accurate.
What? Which part?
Cut to Steve's girlfriend Jasmine with her young son Dylan and their yellow dog. They're trying to get to Steve's military base, called El Toro, which is the bull. She manages to rescue several survivors along the way, except for one doomsday religious zealot.
You cannot defy what has come! It is the end!
The dog with them helps recover a severely wounded First Lady, who was thought dead. Meanwhile, Steve drags the alien remains through the desert. He meets Russ and the motorhome cavalcade, who are on the road too, and it's all coming together with the connections between characters. President Whitmore gets to see Area 51 for the first time and learn about the underground research that's been going on since before he was born, probably.
Where does all this come from? How do you get funding for something like this?
Halfway through this movie, we meet another new character, Dr. Oken, the head researcher at Area 51. He reveals the craft they've been studying for decades, which looks surprisingly like the ship Steve crashed down, only bigger.
But since these guys started showing up, all the little gizmos inside turned on.
I think that's information the president would have liked yesterday. The Mad Dr. Oaken then reveals they have 3 alien bodies in stasis, who all look like the aliens Steve is currently dragging through the desert.
We're looking at the worldwide destruction of every major city in the next 36 hours.
The number 36 is what Hollywood Babylon uses to symbolize 3 sixes, or 666, the number of the beast from the Book of Revelation. Officials now have a live alien body to conduct their tests and experiments on, and the goal is to try to fly the dormant ship as a counterattack. Steve learns his home base, El Toro, has been destroyed, but that's where Jasmine and others are headed. The live alien fights back, so to speak, and affects the mind of Dr. Oaken, and then tries to escape its captivity. It cannot speak itself, but speaks through the doctor to the president, who tries to negotiate a peace deal.
I saw what they're planning to do. I like locusts.
Locusts, you say? Yahweh used locusts as one of the plagues in Egypt as a judgment against worship of a false god. But there is a more similar picture in Revelation 9, which I'll get to.
Hey, toast. To the end of the world.
The president officially gives the order to use nuclear force against the alien crafts and the inhabitants. If their goal is to destroy the Earth and kill everyone, POTUS will beat them to it.
May our children forgive us.
But it is to no avail. The nuclear weapons are ineffective against the far more technologically advanced alien crafts. The survivors at El Toro are brought in when Steve goes rogue, but it's too late for the First Lady.
Is Mommy sleeping now?
Yeah. Mommy's sleeping.
When all hope seems lost, David gets an inspired idea to take down the threat using a virus. A computer virus.
I gave it a virus. Computer virus.
They have to make them sick. That seems like it aligns with the COVID narrative we've been seeing. Steve volunteers to fly the hostage ship up to the mothership, but they need to coordinate a worldwide attack on the localized ships, and they need as much force and as many pilots as they can get. We are shown the first to respond as the nation of Israel, and that is significant. But it's also British armed forces, Russian, Japanese, allies and enemies to come together against a common enemy. In the early hours of America's Independence Day, their commander-in-chief gives a rousing speech to encourage the brave young men about to risk their lives for their country.
The 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday, but as the day when the world declared in one voice, "We will not go quietly into the night."
Steve pilots the alien craft, and David goes along to implant the virus. All other units deployed to attack at the same time, including President Whitmore. Once inside the core of the hive mind in the mothership, David releases the virus.
All we can do now is pray.
Their plan works, and the worldwide counterattack takes place to bring down the local ships. But David and Steve are trapped on the mothership as the aliens fight back on the Earth.
Come on in. Shema Kolenu Hashem Eloheinu.
I'm not Jewish.
Nobody's perfect.
When it comes down to the last missile, it's Russ, the abducted crop duster, who sacrifices his life to save everyone and destroy the ship.
What your father did was very brave. You should be proud of him.
I am.
Steve and David have no choice but to launch a nuke into the core, which shakes them loose, and they manage to escape.
Elvis has left the building!
Another Elvis reference. There is victory over all the Earth, commingled with the grief of loved ones lost.
Didn't I promise you fireworks?
Final image is the wrecked alien craft and streams of fire through the bright blue sky. For a movie about America's Independence Day, I definitely thought it would be completely Americana coded. Patriotism, American flags, none of that was really present. Something else I noticed was absent was the blue or red tie on the president. I'm assuming President Whitmore was a Democrat, but they never gave an indication either way. At the time this movie was released, Bill Clinton, a Democrat, was actually in the White House. Perhaps there were some similarities between the fictional President Whitmore and the actual President Clinton, but nothing too obvious. though I don't think that was the point. It seemed to point to a different nation, frankly, and that was Israel. There was a subtle reference to the Hebrew nation, but not so subtle was the hero David and his faithful father, Julius. Their names also interest me, as Julius is a Roman name, not a Hebrew name. In fact, it could even be considered a reference to Caesar. But David is the most famous name among the kings of God's chosen people, Israel. And the Messiah is also called the Son of David in much of Scripture. The father-son narrative was fairly consistent throughout, which tends to point me to a false Christ, counterfeit Heavenly Father when it comes to Babylon. Besides David and Julius, Steve acts as an adoptive parent to young Dylan. Russ is an absent yet sacrificial father to his children, perhaps not even their biological father. And President Whitmore is more than father to the nation, but also has a young daughter, not a son. 9/11 and COVID programming aside, the obvious alien disclosure was the real star of the show. However, they didn't make them look like the tall grays that we'd expect. In fact, they were referred to as locusts, and they even resembled locusts a little. In the Exodus account, during the 10 plagues, locusts were the 8th and were sent to eat up the vegetation and plants, not destroy the animals or people. It is, in fact, when locusts return in the last days that they resemble what was shown in Independence Day. Smoke rising, blocking out the sun, and out of the smoke, locusts come down to the earth like scorpions. And we're told not to destroy the plants and vegetation, but to torture those who did not take the mark of the beast on their forehead for 5 months. They had a king of the abyss over them, whose name in Greek is Apollyon, the destroyer. Maybe it's not a perfect match, but it very much seems like that's what they were telling us here. When I deconstructed Armageddon, it was very clearly the judgment of Yahweh on the earth, and so is this to an extent. Coming alien invasion is another judgment. It isn't the final judgment, but it is judgment, and only the chosen inheritance of Yahweh will be spared. Again, you ought to know the word for yourself and not take my word for it. That's all I have for this one. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and a thumbs down if you didn't. Subscribe if you want to, but don't follow me. Follow the only one who saves you. And until next time, keep looking up.
All I did was stumble onto their signal. I don't know how helpful I can be.